Sorry, can I just make one more point, Senator, before you start again, and I'll be quiet then. The other factor that's relevant to me is, as I said, these are medical evacuation flights or emergency flights. They're very significant flights. We've had lots of discussions about those in the past. Most of the time, the passengers are highly qualified surgeons or medical staff who are going there to do something. They are very highly qualified. If I asked any of them, did they expect the people up the front of the plane would be qualified, I think I know the answer that I would get. This is pretty fundamental.
But this wasn't a question about...
Well, it is for the company, Senator, and that's where I lost my confidence.
I mean, there's separation of the... And listen, I'm not going to split hairs here. I hear your case. Let's send it back.
In the instance of the case with the chief pilot and a bunch of students where he's granting them a licence, it's not true to say that CASA were comfortable with that, because you litigated against one of the
well, he clearly did. I might add that I was actually out of the country at the time, but the point is that the case was litigated and CASA was brought to book for, they didn't use the term of being somewhat complicit in this, but the judge did make the point saying, hang on, you never took away his delegation. You registered tests that he was going to conduct at a time where you should have known by looking at your own records that he was not, he didn't hold the qualification. It's really not fair for you, CASA, to be taking this action. That's one of the reasons the decision went the way it did. So
in the decision, in the legend at the start of each decision, I don't know what the legal term is for that, but they make reference to the de facto officer doctrine. So it's not a good faith test. It's simply a case in law, and we're very familiar with that particular doctrine here in the Senate, because it's the doctrine that means we don't have to go back and count votes again simply because a senator is later found to be ineligible.
Yes. The court found that the de facto officer doctrine was inapplicable in this case. It was inapplicable in this case. There's a clear finding of the decision of the court said, we hear that argument, it does not apply in this instance. There's no de facto officer, because a de facto officer has to, in fact, meet most of the technical requirements for what it is the person is supposed to do. I'm happy to discuss that, or can correspond with you about that, but the case is unequivocal that the de facto officer doctrine did not apply in that case. It was rejected.
In this particular case, it took from the 6th or 7th of December until the 16th of January to allow this company to resume full operation, something 6 weeks in total. Now that's on the back of what I might call administrative matters. We understand these pilots can fly. They know how to fly. So one of them had 30,000 hours and may well have been much more qualified than someone who only had 3,000 hours in a similar aircraft, but had met all of the validity requirements. In the case of PalAir, where there's a ditching off Norfolk, it only took 5 weeks to get PalAir back in the air.
That's not quite correct.
No?
They were progressively returned back to the air, initially limited to, if I'm correct, metro freight flights. It wasn't, their jet operation didn't return for quite some time. It was a progressive return in accordance with the management action plan.
The 18th of November 2009, PalAir ditches off Norfolk Island, and on the 24th of December, 5 weeks later, PalAir resumes flying of Westwind aircraft.
I'm not sure that that's the case. Look, it could be. I believed it was a staged flights, and the last part of the recommencing flying was the Westwind medevac flights.
Senator, they're also flying on the 21st of December because I gave them approval to fly their F-50 from that date.
Yeah, they only had one pilot. I think it's a twin pilot. It requires two pilots.
Well, they had a pilot and they had two people.
He was the Czech pilot.
He was the Czech pilot.
And he went up and did those 2 checks that weekend.
So therefore they were up and ready to go over Christmas, which was the decision we made and the risk that I took. So I don't think it's reasonable to say they're out from the 6th until the 18th of January.
Yeah, they actually had an F-50 crew, did a Czech pilot and 2 pilots.
Yeah. So I understand your point.
If we woke up on one morning in a perfect world, how long would it take number one to correct, as a check and test pilot, his credentials? Is that available in Australia? Is it available where he lived?
As long as it takes him to get to Paris and go on the flight simulator for a couple of days.
Into Paris?
To a simulator. Yeah.
That's where the flight safety simulator is.
I understand that's what they attempted to do, but over Christmas the simulator was shut down.
They did approach us in early January and said that they couldn't get any simulator
Said they couldn't get
time.
any simulator space. We found slots and stuff.
We found some for them and called the simulator operator to try and get them slots. And told them to get on their bike and go and get it done.
So we tried to assist them.
So
So let's just pretend he's come home from Gay Parry. How long would it take him, in reasonable circumstances, to get 3, 4, 5, 6 and 7 back up and check and test them?
For him, it's a 3 or 4 day check, depending on the provider.
Per person?
No, for the check pilot to get current in the simulator.
that's what he did in
Yes.
Paris.
He then comes back, it's a 1 day flight per person.
Okay, so what are we talking about? Flying around for 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, 5 hours?
Be some ground briefings and questions, which can take typically a couple of hours, and then the flight time typically 2 hours or so.
So you could get them back online pretty quickly. And Senator, to be frank here, and I have to be, this is that operator's commercial issues. My issues are different. I mean, I understand his commercial issues, but my issues are different. And I've been sitting here listening to things like the FalconAir debate for a number of years, and I still hold firmly to the view that this needs to be a safe operation. These are big jets. This needs to be safe.
Let me just put a bit of
that's it in a
background to
nutshell.
this. So, one of the problems is, of course, that at some stage during this, they thought that your people, you, Mr. Campbell, was pissed off with them and therefore acting unreasonably in the sense of
You did have a history with the check pilot, didn't you, from a previous...
I've known this, that's check pilot number
Yeah.
1 for many
Yeah.
years. He's quite volatile, but we have a good working relationship. Every now and then he blows up because he doesn't like CASA. I often wear the brunt of that, but we had a very friendly conversation on the morning of the Dominic flight, discussing his retirement, and I didn't know of any animosity between us.
There was an incident straight after where you were annoyed on the 9th of December.
well, I think you need to. Oh, just hold on, steady. I think you need to put the circumstances and ask him was he
Sure.
annoyed. You can't leave with that.
Someone posted something on an internet site that you got
yes.
annoyed with. Can you describe
Well, I'm not sure it was pilot 1
Sure.
or the other
someone?
pilot.
Yeah.
Yes, we got back from the flight about 9 o'clock at night, and
This is the check flight for Dominic.
and at about that time, someone had put on the pilot rumour network, P. Prune, some disparaging comments about how the process went and all of that. I don't remember the details of it, but it was sent to me by the other pilot, the other flying ops inspector. The owner of the company, Mr. De Stoop, had previously spoken to me and said he was furious with his pilots posting stuff on the rumour network. It's really, he doesn't agree with it. It's destructive, and he told them to stop. So it was really disappointing to see that it had happened again after this, when we'd gone out of our way to make sure this flight went ahead, when it could have easily have stopped at any point, quite legitimately. And when I passed it on to him, it was alerting him to it's still going on, Mark. And he rang me just after I emailed him and said he was quite disappointed.
Senator, I'd like to say I think any suggestion that any relationship between these two gentlemen caused anything in this space is frankly spurious. You can see how far we went with this organisation to try and get them up and running. You understand very clearly the decisions that I need to make, and I need to make them. I make these decisions on a daily basis. These are important decisions, and you're held to account for them. They run an organisation, and they need to be held to account for theirs. They needed to have their regime working. They did not. And they can get in the media and say it was paperwork, a bit of maintenance paperwork or a bit of flight crew paperwork. But there are a lot of other aviators who watch this. They know what we look at too, and they have their paperwork up to date. This is important, and in my view, and this is my job. This is what I do.